Good evening. We're going to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, if you please get roll call.
Chairperson Michelle Martinez.
Present.
Member Ben Sarmiento.
Here.
Great, thank you. We do have some members that wish to speak. At this time, I'm going to ask for Karen Romero Estrada to come before us, followed by Nancy Mejia. Karen's not here. How about yourself, Nancy? You are present.
Sorry, I didn't know you were going to do comments. So quickly, so should we go to Idri Ramos? Idri, are you available? Not here?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nancy Mejia, and I'm here representing Latino Health Access. And before I start, I just want to say my condolences to everyone and staff that for the loss of Hassan, our old planning director. I found out this weekend, and we're here for everybody if you need anything. So I'm here to speak on agenda item number 8. Regarding the draft of the real property disposition policy. And I'm here with the Equity for All Coalition, and a couple of folks are on their way. They're running a little late. And so we are really glad to hear that you're all taking, this committee is taking leadership in creating a process. We came before you in October of 2016 to raise some concerns about the process that was being used in order to sell I think it's over 90 city-owned vacant parcels. And so we thank you for that. But since then, we've engaged in conversations with council, also with city staff from several departments, with the community, to explore different alternatives to selling the land to the highest bidder, especially when we have so many community needs. And so I just wanted to share with you what we're asking today is that before the policy is taken to the full council, that we get a chance to sit with staff in order to review it and incorporate the recommendation and input that we've gathered from the community since 2016. And so recently, since then, we've held community forums, we've done presentations, we've outreached at different events. And we also did surveys. And so I just want to share with you that in October of 2017, Latino Health Access surveyed 1,205 voters from densely populated working class neighborhoods in Central Santana, primarily wards 2 and 5, via phone and door-to-door contact, asking specifically about what they thought of the sale of public land. 91% of these 1,205 voters surveyed said they support the community deciding how vacant lots are used, demonstrating strong support for the disposition of public land to include a clear community input process. In addition to that, 87% of them surveyed agreed that their neighborhoods need more parks, affordable places to live and shop, and community gardens. And because we recognize that where we live impacts our health, we also asked about household health status. And half of the voters surveyed, about 51%, so that's about, over 600 people, voters that we surveyed, said that someone in their household suffered from at least one of these conditions: diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and chronic stress. And so our community engagement efforts have revealed the need for the city to, 1, put community first by including residents in the conversation about disposition of public land, and 2, to prioritize the use of public land for development that will meet specific neighborhood needs and promote health and equity, consistent with those spelled out in the city's strategic plan, the housing element, and the general plan. And with specific lots, we can be very strategic and preserve for uses that the community has that are a priority. For instance, with affordable housing, we know the lots are small, but it's our chance to try new models like tiny houses. I know there have been several organizations in the city that have expressed an interest in that. And also with open space, we can try pocket parks, especially in areas that are very park poor. So thank you. That's all I have for today.
Thank you, Nancy. Isri Ramos? And is Karen here now? No? Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, my name is Isuri Ramos. I'm also here to speak on item number 8, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Kennedy Commission tonight. We are happy to see that this item is on the agenda tonight, and we have also participated in a community outreach process with Latino Health Access and many partners. And I just want to reiterate a little bit of what Nancy Mejia said. We have a real desire for community and stakeholders to be part of a collective process with this committee and with the City Council as this draft policy is reviewed. Speaking on behalf of the Kennedy Commission, we have a real interest to ensure that we're also providing affordable housing for our most vulnerable communities here in Santana that need it. So that's affordable housing for individuals with extremely low incomes. And I just ask that you please ensure that as a part of this process, we're all able to participate and view this draft with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Reina here? Reina? Chris? Karen? Okay, if they do come in later, we'll give them an opportunity to speak. So I'll just go ahead and put these cards to the side and move forward with our agenda. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the January 8, 2017 regular meeting. So moved. Second, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. The second item is review fiscal year 2016-2017 single audit. Francisco.
Yes, I'm going to hand it over to my Assistant Finance Director, Sergio Vidal, who's going to do the presentation.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Sergio Vidal, Assistant Finance Director here with the city. Pleased to present to you this evening. We can get thank you very much for once. Pardon me as we load this. There should be a hand. Yeah.
And in the future, as I mentioned before, if we can get some of these documents prior to our meeting so we can, you did? No, I don't see it here either. I don't have it. Nope, no. It's okay, no worries. Go ahead.
Pardon me, thank you. Thank you again, committee members. The item pleased to present you this evening, the single audit of federal awards, commonly known as the single audit or the CIFA. Today, we're just going to go through a quick agenda, just have some introductions in terms of the report. We'll also be introducing our auditors who examine the single audit portion of the city's federal grant programs. And White Nelson Deal Evans is also the independent auditor for the city's comprehensive annual financial report, or commonly referred to as a CAFR audit. We'll go into some single audit report details, and then we'll open up for some questions. Just as a quick recap, the single audit is an audit of federal grant programming. So this is solely for federal grants, not state, not county, or the local grants. So this is strictly for federal grants. The city is required to have this report as a result of expending or having $750,000 or more in federal grants a year. Obviously, we're well over that, and we're approximately $60 million. And as mentioned, the audit was performed by White Nelson Deal Evans. White Nelson Deal Evans here, Mr. Nitin Patel and Ms. Daphne Chu are here in the audience, and they're open for questions as well during the presentation if you have any questions. And for the 16-17 fiscal year, the city has indicated $60.5 million federal grant program this year. It's up from about 56, 57 in 15-16. 24 grant programs. The main objective for the single audit, however, is to just determine compliance with federal rules and regulations, and also to review and test major programs. And we'll get into shortly what constitutes a major program.
Very quickly, just in the future, under this federal administration and the president we're dealing with in regards to sanctuary cities, obviously there are some monies that of potential loss from grants. If we can just indicate, out of those 24 grant programs, which ones are safe based on under, the Constitution where they can't raid them, and those that can, I think it's important for us to understand that, because obviously he thinks, that he can take it all, and certainly that's not true. And so just for us to be prepared as we're doing this single audit, but moving forward, if there's any potential loss of any of these revenues, because obviously it's significant. 60 million definitely in regards to some of the programs that we're doing, in particular housing, could have a huge impact in the future.
Thank you, Chair, Committee Member Sarmiento. In that regard, we have close communication with Holland and Knight as well as our legal staff here. We monitor that very closely. As of right now, the only area that has been in jeopardy is law enforcement, DOJ grants. That's the only thing they've been able to tie any nexus to. I can tell you that there is only one of those programs, only one is at stake, which is the burn grant. For the city, the last year that we were awarded that was about $90,000. So we're talking very small dollar amounts in relative proportion to the total amount. But that is something that we can definitely make sure that we're monitoring and working closely with finance to identify those.
Great, thank you.
And pardon me, the major programs as we continue the Section 8 vouchers, obviously the largest program for the city, $32.8 million. So that's actual expenditures incurred. Likewise with home partnership program, 1.7 million actual expenditures incurred. So there might be some variation in terms of what Mr. Garcia mentioned. The grant award, it may be spread out over multiple fiscal years, but this is actually what was spent in that current fiscal year 16-17. We did list some items there, but just a quick recap on the grant programs or highlights. 1.5 million paid for acquisition of rehab and affordable housing, rehab some mobile homes, and the Department of Treasury asset forfeiture, 1.4 million. And that's a Department of Justice grant as well, Department of Treasury.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure. Great.
It's kind of all in that same, the federal, it's the alphabet soup of federal agencies, but I think obviously the lobbyists will be more zero in as what specific grants that the Attorney General has jurisdiction. But these are the major programs that were tested in relation to the single audit, and we'll later in this presentation we'll provide some results. Other programs as well, Community Development Block Program. WIOA is CDBG is about $6.5 million grant, or WIOA, that's used to be at the SAR Tech Center, and it's currently been moving about a $500,000 grant, $3.3 million grant. Highway Planning, Construction, and UASI as well. There's some other programs as well that encompass the city's single audit report and federal grant program. Here's a schedule of the single audit, and so you're aware, Chair and committee member, this is also posted on our website as well, but definitely we'll be providing that information to you prior. This was actually just completed recently, so it's not required to be submitted to the federal government until March 31st. However, the city has its March 31st deadline has submitted in compliance on a timely basis. I know this is real small on the screen, but this basically outlines all the programs that are encompassed in the single audit program. And as mentioned, the opinion and also the schedule of expenditure federal awards. You may hear CFA. This is the major component of this report. The results, we received a clean opinion. So an unmodified clean opinion, audit opinion from our independent auditors. There was no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies found in the city's compliance with federal rules and regulation. However, we did have a compliance finding related to the asset forfeiture fund. Finance is working with the department, and it was related to equipment management. This concludes my report. If there's any questions.
Questions? Just very quickly for me, because I remember, I think it was last year, the year before, we did have some compliance issues in regards to our housing funds, and I know that was resolved. Just in the future, as we move forward, because currently the Secretary HUD, his conversations in regards to eliminating all pretty much subsidized housing, he continues to have those conversations, and so and I know we have our lobbyists that are continuing to monitor that. That definitely would be a massive impact to us. And so whatever we can do to be in the clean and not have any irregularities that, they will come after us, I think it's going to be important as we move towards in the future. We're dealing with an administration that is really not friendly to California, obviously. And so I just think that we need to, dot all our I's and cross all our T's, understanding the situation that we face here in California with this administration. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is verbal discussion on the one-stop shop. Candida?
Good afternoon, council members. On February 11th, a team from the city of Santa Ana, which included you, Mayor Pro Tem, as well as the city manager and staff from CDA, Community Development Agency, the Finance Department, as well as Planning and Building, visited the city of Riverside's Community Development Department, where we saw two programs that they have initiated just last year, within the last year. The first one was the One Stop program, which we've talked about, and that's the physical arrangement of how they interact with customers. And it was really enlightening because they did model their physical layout after how Santa Ana's public counter looks like. And it was a real compliment to us, and they were flattered that we were coming to them now that we had done that. The two, they have pretty much, many of the things are the same. They have all the key agencies in one location. It's not on the ground floor like ours, but they are all in one location. They have a customer queuing system. We just implemented the Qmatic system in our shop. And they have a comfortable place for people to wait while they're being called, and we've done that as well. The two places where they differ from us and where we really could take a lesson from them is that we have a receptionist and information desk, which is basically, it doesn't provide the kind of triage or sorting that their system does. Ours is basically, yes, welcome, sit over here, take a number, kind of information desk, or if you need to go upstairs. Theirs really has technically trained people who can tell them which counter they have to start at, as opposed to ours. It's more of a help desk than an information center. The other thing is
more of a help desk versus an information
no,
center?
theirs is more of a help desk,
okay.
versus ours is just a reception desk. I guess that's the major difference. They have technical staff there.
That's the person that we have right in the middle, the gentleman that's always there?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes, and he also answers phones citywide. He has a number of other tasks that are not related to getting people directly to our one-stop shop and getting people to the right place at the right time. So the second component is that they have it's kind of a fun thing. It's sort of like the whack-a-mole kind of thing that has these big buttons, and it allows customers to rate their experience. And so you can either point, you can point really good, kind of okay, or rotten, and you just whack it, and it comes up. And they, it's really good feedback, and it's really quick. And so they have a really quick, innovative way of getting feedback. So that's their one-stop shop. But the other important component that they have is they have a streamlined Riverside system, which I wanted to talk about that as well, because we had some really good takeaways on that. They looked at their development review processing system in terms of how they can expedite projects faster and get them through quicker. They ended up, what they did was they started out visiting jurisdictions all over the country even. They committed a 2-year time frame for it. It was a very quick time frame. And they engaged a team of stakeholders who were involved in the process. And it wasn't just staff members. They had staff members very much dedicated to the process, but they also engaged a group of people from outside, people from the business community, people from the development community, people from anybody that would touch the development process. They got them involved, and they really it was hard at first because the city had to take some pretty harsh comments about what they were doing. But everybody worked together and tried to find some common ground, and they got them to a place where they had agreed upon some ground rules. And ultimately, that group of stakeholders was one of their biggest champions in the community when they did get their process online. The other thing that they did, which was really, which I thought was really exciting, was they didn't just hire another planner to figure out how the planning system worked well. What they did was they hired a corporate executive from Disney. Who came in and looked at their system and tried to think about how you could best get people through. Ultimately, they committed to a 30-day turnaround, a number of...
What's our turnaround now?
Oh, don't ask. 2 weeks plan check for simple and 4 weeks for complex. So they are, but, they made commitments in terms of hiring the staff and people that they needed to have done. So it was, there were a lot of really good takeaways from it. And I think we're looking at how we can implement it here using the resources that we have.
So what are kind of our next steps based on lessons learned from Riverside, I guess, for us? Because I think many of us, and myself, Councilman Sarmiento, and Councilman Benavides, that sat here, and we've talked about economic development and how do we provide better customer service. And it's kind of like we've been repeating this over and over again. And obviously we have challenges because of resources. And Riverside did something very unique. They went to the voters. Right, so that was very unique that they were able to get chambers of commerce, bargaining units, and they went, and so they have a source of revenue to expedite a lot of their services and having the staff to fulfill that need. And certainly I think that's something that we should look down the pipeline and making sure that we have a one-stop shop that works well for us, because obviously right now that's keeping us afloat is a lot of our development that we have here. We definitely could have certainly a lot more development, but obviously we've heard the complaints from various business people or the development community that our process is very convoluted and many times working in silos that time is money for them. And certainly we continue to hear those stories. So I would just like to, if we can get a recap on what are some next steps in regards to customer service. What is it going to take financially to get us up to speed so that we can provide the services that are needed, specifically in this arena, as we continue to say economic development is one of our number one priorities, but obviously we don't dedicate the funding to make that a reality. And so if we can get some of those next steps, that would be appreciative. And then, the council, as we look at this fiscal year budget, what can we do to support an effort like this? Obviously, there are some small things that we can do immediately, and then that low-hanging fruit. But in the long term, what are those resources that will be needed in regards to staff? The technical assistance. Bringing probably an expert in like they did. And so those are some of just the comments that I would provide you all here today. But just personally, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to join me, to going out there. It is not an easy commute. So definitely want to thank you all for learning from your colleagues across the region. It was very enlightening to hear from the city of Riverside. More importantly, we didn't only learn about economic development while we were there. We actually also got to learn about the homeless and their plans and their initiatives. And so it was a really great opportunity for us to exchange and see how they actually did their counter. That Santa Ana, is at the cutting edge in a lot of our stuff, but sometimes we lose our way. But it was great to see that they followed our format of our one-stop shop. And so I just want to congratulate, all of you for a job well done. Some of you are fairly new, but those that been here for the city for quite some time, definitely you were visionary and did something exciting that the city of Riverside followed. And so I believe that we should continue our relationship with the city of Riverside and partner up with them. I'm always a big believer, and I've always told my colleagues across this region that we're all supportive of sister cities internationally and across the world, but we should have our own regional sister cities. We should have, Riverside should be our sister city. We're a lot like them. The city of Garden Grove and Irvine should be our sister cities. We shouldn't be looking at China or Mexico when we could have our own local regional sister cities here and learn a lot from one another. And so I would just implore us to look at those relationships and partnerships in figuring out how we can continue to improve in this area. Councilman Sarmiento, any comments?
Yeah, thanks. Excuse my voice. I'm losing it. I had a little bit of a flu over the weekend, so it's been a struggle. As the day goes on, the voice gets less and less strong. So I'll keep my comments short. I lived in Riverside for a little bit. I never thought we'd be looking to Riverside as an example. But, look, it's a great community, but I think that this isn't rocket science. This isn't difficult. This isn't something we have to go visit a number of cities. If you talk, you have the best way to find out what best practices are, just going to the actual industry that we're serving. If you go to the development community itself and talk to them and ask them and canvass them, what is it that's lacking? What are we missing? What do they see in other communities that is being done well, and what is it that we're not? And one of the things that I always ask is that question, and they always say it's predictability. When you go someplace, you want to know what to expect. You want it delineated for you. You want it obvious. You want something that you can, know exactly what it is you're going to be expending with respect to monies and time. So, that's not difficult to understand. It's something difficult to implement. It's in theory, it makes all the sense in the world. It's just getting there in practice. The second thing they want to see is just a predictable response time. How quickly can you turn something around? And that's where I think we always run into a challenge, because there are moments where we have peaks and everybody comes in and floods us with applications, and there are moments where there are valleys, right? And, things are dry and the opportunities maybe aren't there, the interest isn't there. What I've seen other cities that are real nimble and good at this do is that they go outside. So, when they realize that they realize they're understaffed to be able to perform quickly with applications that are pending, they go to firms and seek outside help and try to turn things around, and maybe that cost is passed along to the actual applicant itself, for an expedited review or an accelerated review process. Those things I think are real helpful. But I think more than anything, there are things that we can do that are just non-fiscal, right, that don't cost us much. And that's the experience that we were talking about. I don't think we need to retain anybody from Disney or from Knott's Berry Farm or from Magic Mountain or any other experience. Just, if you're going to give somebody news that may not be what they want to hear, just do it in a way that's respectful. Do it in a way that you say no, but maybe no with a comma attached. Well, let's see what else we can do. And so that's something that, again, as I've represented clients in other cities for work having to do with planning and other departments, it's the manner in which we respond to folks. And I know sometimes we get overwhelmed, but we forget that these folks are paying for the services that we provide our residents. So those are just, simple things. I think that, I know I tried to speak with our prior city manager about, I don't think we ever connected on that and never understood that, but that's something that I think, after having been here as long as I have, you run this almost as a private sector model. You really do see that, you have clients, and you don't treat them as residents, you don't treat them as applicants, you treat them as clients. And you realize that you want that client to come back, you want that client to leave with a good opinion of, their experience, because that opinion, once it's a bad opinion, it travels. And the network and the community of this industry is very small. And so, folks realize once somebody has a bad experience, they know that it'll translate to somebody else's. So in any event, those are just my comments. And the only other thing on an unrelated topic, Madam Chair, is I know that we have a lot of people here for agenda item number 8. If maybe we can bump that up, that would be great.
I was just waiting for the speakers.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's it. We're going to move now to item 8. Hopefully the speakers, I was waiting, I did see Chris. He must have stepped away. Did Chris leave? Oh, Chris. Okay, fantastic. Followed by Karen and then Reina. I was waiting on you. Pick it up. Put it up. You're tall, Chris.
There you go.
There you
okay,
go.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I think it's on. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Christopher Forden. I'm the secretary with Santa Ana Active Streets. It's a coalition of different groups, and we basically advocate for safer, more equitable streets for folks that walk, bike, and thank you for and thank you for the time today to speak. So we're part of the Equity for All coalition, and what we're asking for is that city and staff meet with Equity for All before they send this item to council, that they consider all the community input that they gathered on this important issue. One of the things that we've been working on lately is reflecting back on our history of street widenings, reflecting back on the lots that were created by transit projects, that were paid for by transit projects. They were meant to, help congestion. They were meant to help all these different things. And honestly, they've been extremely controversial. In 1992, we lost businesses, we lost homes in the 90s from those widenings. They've been vacant for many years. So when we're thinking of selling those lands back to different entities, we want to make sure that they're actually being considered to the areas around, because people did lose their resources. People lost their neighbors, and people lost a lot of communities. So it's just being able to listen to the folks that that remember those things, and also know that if we're not actually taking part and actually listening to the community, then we're also just perpetuating the cycle where a street can be widened and we don't care what goes in the end. So we just want to present that to you, and please consider Equity for All's comments and input. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Karen Estrada, followed by Reina.
Good evening. My name is Karen Romero Estrada, and I'm a research and policy analyst for Accord, which is also part of the Equity for All coalition. The Equity for All coalition strongly believes in ensuring that the residents most impacted by public land disposition and development participate in the planning and the development of our communities, and that the development should benefit local communities so that they may continue to remain and thrive in Santa Ana. After engagement with the community through dialogue and surveying, we have identified some priorities that should be considered in the public land policy. The list should not be considered exhaustive of the coalition's concerns, but rather these are preliminary principles that the coalition expects to engage with the city and to be reflected in all of the city's policy efforts to plan and dispose of public land. The public land policy should, 1, require the production of affordable housing and prioritize the sale of land to nonprofit developers. 2, preserve a significant percentage of vacant lots for public benefit purposes. 3, mitigate any environmental and pollution contamination from new development. 4, ensure impacted community voices are incorporated in the development process by establishing an advisory committee. 5, maximize community benefits in the sale of land by having a certain percentage of sales from the profit allocated towards a funding source exclusively for community projects. We are mutually concerned about the success and ability of all Santa Ana residents to live and thrive in the community. The city has an opportunity to alleviate the housing crisis on Santa Ana residents in dire need of affordable housing in the face of skyrocketing property values and displacements. Therefore, we urge the Economic Development, Infrastructure, Budget, and Technology Committee to postpone any vote on the city's draft real property disposition policy in order to consider the input and recommendations we have gathered from Central Santa Ana residents, including from that of over 1,000 voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Reina?
Sí, muy buenas tardes, miembros del comité.
Reina.
Sí, buenas tardes. Hola, mi nombre es Reina Artero y soy parte de la cooperativa Manos Unidas Creando Arte y estoy aquí para pedir su apoyo para que se forme un comité que junto con ustedes podamos crear una ordenanza de la tierra donde el punto de vista de nosotros, los residentes y pequeños empresarios de Santa Ana, y como todos ustedes, bueno, algunos de ustedes creo que ya nos han visitado en un mercadito que estamos trayendo por la ciudad y ya tenemos más de 2 años y pues no hemos crecido económicamente como hubiéramos querido. Entonces, pedimos que nos incluyan en la ordenanza y también quisiéramos sentarnos con cada uno de ustedes para que escuchen nuestras sugerencias e ideas para que nos incluyan en esta ordenanza. Queremos trabajar junto con ustedes. Por favor, apóyenos y gracias por escucharme.
Gracias, Reina.
Gracias.
Okay. Ana will translate for Reina.
Good evening. My name is Reina Artero, and I'm part of the Cooperativa Cooperative Manos Unidas Creando Arte, United Hands Creating Art. I'm here to seek your support so that together we can revisit and review the language for this public lands ordinance, where our point of view and our input as residents and small business owners of Santa Ana could be incorporated. As some of you know and have visited us in the mercadito that we bring monthly to the city, it has been a challenge to grow the income we're generating. And we think that this is an opportunity to be included, for this vision to be included in the public lands ordinance. We've been working at this for more than 2 years and have identified several challenges. We'd also like for the opportunity to meet with you to address some of the suggestions and ideas that we have so that they may also be included. Thank you for your support and for listening to us.
Thank you, Ana, for the translation. We're going to bring this item back to staff, which is a presentation of the draft real property disposition policy. Certainly, we received the 12-page, so I doubt we'll be able to read this all today, but certainly would love to hear some initial thoughts from our staff and wanting to thank them for putting this together and from hearing us out and hearing the community that this is something that has been in the pipeline for quite some time, and just want to thank you specifically, Rob, for hearing us and making sure that you put something together. Appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome, Mayor Pro Tem. And maybe just as a little bit of prelude, we talked about how we wanted to handle this, and this is what I gave you tonight is the first draft handed to the first 2 council members for review. We thought about doing a presentation, and we thought, maybe the better way to do this is because it's not an incredibly lengthy document, but there's 10 or 11 pages here along with some code provisions from our municipal code. So we thought we would provide this to you tonight and then follow up as I had discussed with you just prior to the start of the meeting. This is really kind of the first step in bringing this to the council. Our initial thought was that we might be before the entire council on March 20th in a workshop. Just based on the testimony that we've had here tonight, I think we should probably delay that perhaps till the first meeting in April. We have a meeting scheduled on the 22nd next week with Santa Ana Building Healthy Communities. They had reached out to us, and we're happy to sit down and kind of, I think what we will probably do is kind of go through our approach, hear what they would like to see, their comments, suggestions, and if I might, for all the groups that are here tonight, when we are concluded with this item, I would love to meet you in the hallway and get your contact information so that we may follow up with you. So the document that I gave you is a result of several months of a staff committee meeting reviewing our municipal code, as I had mentioned, and then also building on what we've heard from the community already, trying to incorporate some of those things into a policy that builds upon our Muni Code and its provisions. Some of the things that came out of this were that, in many respects, the land that we own is often grant funds are used for that, and those grant funds impose certain restrictions on our ability to dispose or require us to dispose that land. The other piece of this is this is a policy that you have before you. We also have been working on the list of properties. And when you review this draft, you'll see one of the aspects of it is a classification system for those properties. Are they good for economic development? Are they good for housing development? Are they good for community benefit use? And those are not mutually exclusive. A property can have more than one designation. So we've kind of taken a stab at that. You do not have that tonight because we're still finalizing it.
Real quickly, how will
Sure.
this interact with our asset management program? Did we wrap up with the consultant? I know Fred's gone now. Did we wrap up and how that would tie in with our asset management in regards to real property of the city? Or is that two different things?
I can't comment on
Well, maybe-
that.
I can comment on that. We're actually kicking off the asset management project this week, but it's really two different things because the assets that this project's working on is more streets, signs, trees, the assets that Public Works is maintaining, those types
Initially, I
of assets.
wanted it to actually include real property as well because we really don't have a system. And so
Right.
as
Well-
we move forward, if, is that something that we need to think about? Obviously, for various reasons, to understand the dynamics of the various factors in regards to grant funding. I think that gives us a lot of hiccups sometimes and very difficult for us to understand what property is surplus, what property, are we eligible to transfer? Is it city-owned? Is it not city-owned? Where is this land? I think we've had this confusion, and when we thought we were doing the asset management initially, when I spoke to our prior city manager, the reason why we were doing this asset management was initially for this purpose, and it was all started on the conversation of the Bristol properties. And so I think we kind of lost touch, and now we're focused on something else, and we definitely needed to do that as well, but certainly
If
we
we-
may need
and-
to take a different approach as we move forward with this.
We think we have the universe of properties.
Okay.
These are city-owned, lion's share along Bristol, as you might expect, but there are a number of others.
Correct.
A couple from the successor agency. What this policy does not include are the housing parcels that are held by the housing successor, and those are handled and treated in the real property, the housing asset disposition policy that you saw at your last council meeting and workshop. So, and that's called out in this policy. These are kind of two different things. So, I think with that, at your convenience, after you've had a chance to take a look at this, I would be happy to sit down with you. And then, in the meantime, we will reach out to any and all groups that would like to meet with us and discuss, what we're coming up with, whether they like it or not, and would very much like to hear their input. We have tried to incorporate, because we get the concept of community benefit, but we also are operating under some restrictions in terms of the grant source sometimes drives us in a certain way, as well as our provisions of our municipal code. So I have attached those Muni Code provisions to this. They're not lengthy, and they actually provide quite a bit of flexibility. So that's,
Fantastic.
then we can have a chat, and then I think, as I said, we can meet with these groups and then circle back.
Thanks, Rob. William, and then City Manager Godinez.
Yes, and I just wanted to comment that the asset management system is a very, very powerful technology tool that may be expanded to easily incorporate property and other assets. So we're barely getting underway, but we'd be happy to, at the end of the asset management system, maybe we can incorporate additional management of assets, properties, et cetera.
Great, thank you. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, Madam Chair. What I was going to just clarify is that typically, though, the asset management systems are to help us track assets that depreciate or degrade over time, really not for real property. Surely we could try to...
But our properties do depreciate.
we're looking at, more for to guide a capital improvement.
Yeah.
Usually, typically, you have a intake for service call. So we track, leaky sewer or something like that. And then when it comes time to do capital work, you can query which ones have had, calls for service in the last 3 years. And you get the segments, and then you can go prioritize, working on those sewers, for example, or those streets, whatever the asset is, or roofs. But certainly we can look and figure out how we can incorporate it there, or we can have a separate system. The biggest thing with real estate assets are just to inventory them and categorize them. I think that's a huge job, and then have a policy that deals with it. So this is a pretty significant effort. I'm really pleased. Rob has been keeping me apprised of the effort in the short time that I've been here.
Yeah, just for your reference, just originally when we first had this conversation with the former city manager Cavazos, I was following the concept of New York that I shared with him, that they ended up going beyond the traditional asset management program and including real property as they were making significant changes in regards to their affordable housing, and people couldn't identify what properties were available because their systems were so old, they were antiquated, and we're facing the same thing. And so that's one of the reasons when we talked about asset management, I was more going in that direction to include that, because we've talked about this for quite some time, and we get various different input from various different staff and what we can do with certain properties. And obviously we're not a very good landlord either, because we have a lot of properties that are either dilapidated or we have not kept up with the certain facade per se. And so as we move forward, we need to consider and think outside the box, just the traditional form of asset management. And so those are just my comments, and I'll pass it on to Councilman Sarmiento.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'm in agreement with the recommendation to, I think we all are, it sounds like staff is as well, to maybe delay this and not have this go before the council on Tuesday, just because I think there needs to be a little bit more discussion. And just as we received this, I'm a fast reader. I annotated about 90% of it, but I need a little bit more time. I think it would be helpful to get some comments from some of the working groups and some of the neighborhood groups that are interested. I know that we've been working on a list and an inventory of the properties for a really long time. I chair the Oversight and Successor Agency board, and I know that at one time we had a list of 90 properties. Those properties are hard to define because some of them are, very small, unusable, and they really only benefit the adjoining property owner, right? And that's normally what happens when you widen a street or you create a park or you do something. So there's very few usable properties left over at the end that can actually result in some benefit to the community. But that shouldn't be difficult for us to be able to at least come up with a list of what those look like, sizes, square footage. Once we have that, I think then we have, for lack of a better term, whether we want to call them assets, whether we want to call them remnant parcels. I'm just, I know in the recitals of the draft, it says that these are procedures that are going to be addressing remnant, unneeded, or marginally used city-owned real property assets. So I'm not sure if that in and of itself already, sort of creates a more limited criteria than what we have, and that's my only concern, is that by unneeded, does that mean that it's just not developable?
Well, no, the list we have a list, we have maps, we have areas, we have put them into the categories that I had mentioned earlier. We're there. I mean, it just that the list is different from the policy. The policy talks about how things get on the list. It talks about how they get categorized, and so this is why we brought you the policy first. I mean, the list is right behind it. This is something that, I mean, we've had a number of meetings. I've been here working on this, pretty directly since last fall. And, I mean, we're there. Right. And the successor agency, interestingly, only has like a couple of properties left. Yeah. And then that's not the housing assets. The housing assets is a different list, not very long either. The majority of these properties are from the Bristol Street widening, and then there's different ones around town, but we have them all mapped. You'll be able to see them. All the groups will be able to see them. I think we're there. And it's all in an Excel spreadsheet. So that's a good starting point if you have an asset management system that you want to fold it into.
Well, hopefully the goal will be just to make sure that we not only know the configuration, know the location, the square footage, but the deed restrictions on them, whether or not proceeds are restricted in any way from those.
We
so
know
all
that.
those definable, I think, criteria that shouldn't be too difficult to identify.
Right.
Once they're available, then we know what inventory we're dealing with, right? And once that happens, then it's much simpler. It's a much easier conversation, I think, to have with folks who want to understand, what we do have. So I would, I would say let's read this. Let's go through this with you. Let's see how we can work. Let's see how we can work on understanding what that list is, and if there, I guess, are there properties that are going to fall outside that list? I mean, are there, or is everything encompassed that we have within that list that's identified?
I think we have the universe for Santa Ana. I do. So,
Great.
Well, yeah.
Thank you, Councilman Sarmiento. And just one last thing, if we can, and I'm just going through here, but the writing's just so small. Don't want to hurt my eyes.
Want a bigger font?
Yeah, with my contacts, it's kind of hard,
Sure.
So I can't really see much.
Be happy to do that.
When I have my glasses, I can actually read, but because I have my contacts on, doesn't really allow me to see small font. But just very quickly, if we can define what surplus land means, because there's times where our city staff come up and say that this is surplus land, this is not, and I'm going, William's looking and he's smiling because I've heard that before. And I just try to, read right through, but I don't see anything here that says surplus land and defining what that means. That would be very important because we've heard that quite often, and certainly the state defines what surplus land.
They do.
And
The
so
government
just
code.
the government code,
Yes.
and they also define that for school districts. And so be interesting because they could only use surplus. I know what it means for school districts, and I certainly know what it means for the state. But what does it mean for the city of Santa Ana? If we can spell that out, that would be greatly appreciated.
I look forward to our one-on-one conversation.
Fantastic.
And one last thing, just to, I know that you've been working on this really hard. We've been trying to tackle this for years, right? I mean, it's been a question that I think many have asked. So to the extent that some of the working groups have a lot of knowledge and a lot of background in this, let's get them incorporated into this process.
Yes.
Let's have them be part of our working group and, help us navigate through this. And, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with them and maybe get a list of who they are as well.
So with your permission, I'm going to disappear into the
Please,
hallway
please.
and,
That's a
and
great
get
idea.
contact info. And
Thank you, Rob. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. Next, really quickly, we're going to move towards the verbal discussion on the infrastructure housing policy. Candida and William.
Yes,
And then, William, I'll just have you move from your 4 as you're speaking to number 9, the update and parking pilot as well.
Sure.
Yeah, to get you guys all out of the way until we can get out of here. My goal is to get us out by 6:30.
Yes, good evening, committee members. A verbal update, part of being development friendly and economic development friendly, we are updating our development impact fees. This was started middle of last year. David Tossick and Associates were awarded a contract. And so the purpose of the study is to quantify the infrastructure costs for expanding housing and other developments in the city, including parks, library, transportation, and sewer and other types of infrastructure. So the consultant was charged to evaluate the city's existing development impact fees, review and confirm the potential of land development projections, and then establish the capital needs, levels of service, and then develop a methodology. And this is really key because we want to provide developers an easy to understand formula and a nexus for their required mitigation. And then we would come back and present that to the council for adoption. So we've been working off of the 2014 Orange County projection data, and we are updating that to include the comprehensive general plan update that's going to be occurring over the next 2 to 4 months. We believe that with those updates, the DIF study can be completed in 6 months, and so we're looking at coming back to the council for approval, a presentation, of course, and an approval in fall of 2018. I did confirm with Tag of my staff to see what those fee impacts are, and it's for capital improvements. There was a question regarding maintenance, and so the government code precludes maintenance from being included into the fees. So what we can do, though, is on a case-by-case basis. For example, if there's a traffic signal that's required, there could be a nexus for maintaining that traffic signal operational for a given development that's nearby. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know that there was a question regarding whether we can include maintenance in the development impact fee study.
Question, if is it in the charter or is it in a municipal code? Because if it's in the municipal code, we can make those changes, right? But if it's in the charter, we cannot. So I guess that's the question that I'm asking, because I think the initial conversation that we had to moving towards this policy was not just to generate one-time monies. Obviously, you all need those one-time monies, but they're one-time monies from developers. Obviously, we want the true cost of housing. There is a life cycle in regards to new infrastructure coming, getting built, and then who's going to maintain that infrastructure? Do we put that into our budget, future forecasting, right? And so there is some issues, and that was one of the reasons why I didn't support one of our projects, was for that mere fact that we're building a new project in an area where we never had housing before. We receive one-time funds, which was a lot of one-time funds that are coming. But again, it's one-time funds. Eventually, there will be deterioration of infrastructure in that part of town, and who's going to maintain it, right? Obviously, that's going to fall back on the taxpayers of Santa Ana, and are we going to be able to maintain those properties, especially in areas where we never really had housing? And so that's one thing that we need to consider. And again, I would just ask if it's in the municipal code and it's done by ordinance. Does this city council have the authority to make those changes? Obviously, if it's in the charter, we have to go to the voters. And so I would like to know what that clear distinction is, so that we can move forward, because, as we continue, again, one-time funds, can only go so far. And obviously, that's when you originally receive those one-time funds for developers, we're putting that into the general fund. We're not putting that into an account for those developments, so that when the property and the deferred maintenance comes up, there's no money for that, right? And so I guess there's the policy decisions that we have to make, that we're either going to collect those one-time funds and put them into account for those projects, or this council is going to make a determination in changing the municipal code or the charter to make sure that we do have ongoing monies to maintain those new developments that are coming into the city. Councilman Sarmiento, any comments? No?
We will follow up and make sure that we're addressing those questions regarding the municipal code, the charter, the government code, et cetera. And then also there is some follow-up with the consultant on how to establish particular accounts, so that when the funds get deposited by the developers, that those funds are set aside for the infrastructure that it's supposed to be expanded. So.
And maybe you would know this better, Candida, than William. The one-time fees that we currently receive for developers for certain projects, those one-time fees, do they go directly to the general fund for all purposes? Or are we using those funds just, for example, if a development and residents in that community during a sunshine say they want X, Y, and Z improvements? For example, we made the change on this council when we were dealing with what are they called? The towers, the cell towers. We said we made a policy decision and said when there is a tower being put up in a neighborhood, that those funds would not go into the general fund, that they would go to that specific neighborhood for improvements. And so I think there's a lot of confusion with that. And so I would just like to get some clarification. Do all one-time fees from development go directly to the general fund for all purposes? Or at times, do we have specific one-time funds from those developments that go to specific items that certain constituents want enhancements.
I'll verify that for you.
If I can jump in here, typically the development impact fees go for specific project mitigations, and they're not in the general fund. They go to a separate account to be saved for that purpose. The cell tower situation is a little different because that is not development impact related. That is sort of a franchise or a permit, and council's making a policy decision to earmark it for future enhancements. But typically the development fees are to pay for a traffic signal, and maybe this might only make up 25% of the total cost. So as other developers come in, we'll ask for their proportional share to eventually put a traffic signal or upgrade a signal or expand the capacity of the sewer or things like that.
Maybe I'm not being very clear, because there are certain mitigation fees that developers pay for, and that money gets taken care of and it's paid for. But then they, for example, like the project on Red Hill, what's it called? The Ryan's project? What's it? The Heritage. He said that he contributed about $11 million or so to the general fund. That $11 million, or whatever that amount was, did that go towards the general fund, or were those for mitigated costs or improvements in that area?
I wasn't here, but I can tell you that some of the fees that developers pay for plan check or planning review and all of those do go into the general fund. But the development impact fees are separate. Those go to specific improvements, capital improvements that are going to be built either at that time or in the future. So the fees for review and normal processing of variances and all that does go to the general fund to pay for staff to cover those costs. But typically development impact fees are separate.
Yeah. So even, or before you get started, Fran, let's just take, for example, 1901 first, right? So 1901 first gets developed, and they have to pay an exaction for the park fees. Those fees are limited to that district for improvements, and I think those monies, at least that's the way it was used for the zoo. There was like $1.5 million that they paid that went towards, well, maybe not $1.5 million, but part of it went towards some improvements at the zoo because it was very close in proximity to that. I think what Michelle's talking about are exactions that are impact fees as a function or a result of that development. So it causes traffic or parking impacts, and then you can use some of those funds to address and help mitigate those impacts. Or
yes, the city manager is correct. In the development impact fees that are associated with the project to mitigate concerns of the project are in fact used for the project. There are other fees that like the park acquisition fees, those are separated out and they're divided up into areas of the city, and those remain within the park acquisition fund. They don't go to the general fund at all. The only fees that actually go to the general fund are related to the permits themselves associated with the project. Those will go to the general fund. The cell tower, actually we separate those monies out. When we receive cell tower money, they're actually in a different fund. But Mayor Pro Tem is correct in that it's designed for the area of which you collected the cell tower revenue from. But we can actually come back and identify for example, if you're interested, how the development impact fees get recorded and where they are.
But as I recall, just to summarize, your original request, Mayor Pro Tem, was beyond the impact fees, because usually impact fees are associated with capital improvement projects, traffic signal or an upgraded sewer or water line or something like that, or parks. But what you were asking is really, is there any way to collect money for the long-term impact, the maintenance cost that is associated with the infrastructure? That is not an easy answer. That I don't have the answer. I think we have to do a little research on that, because I can envision Prop 218 coming to play in that, and so we're going to have to put our heads together and figure out the answer to that. See if anybody else is doing it in California.
I would reach out to the League of Cities because I talked to Ms. Coleman about this, and she called it the true cost of housing that's never really considered, and that there's a lot of it that's not. And I think that they were going to try to work on doing something like that, because that's kind of one of the biggest barriers, or why local municipalities are not building housing.
And I don't know of any city that I've heard of that is doing this, so I don't know. I understand your question. I just don't know the answer. So we'll figure out if there is an answer. There are some
cities in the East Coast that I can send to you that I had sent prior to the prior city manager.
Okay, great.
But in reality, couldn't you negotiate these through a DA? I mean, in other words, because you have some cost recovery impacts, and it's funny because I was on a panel the other day dealing with another asset or another area that we cover. Development agreements are negotiated by both parties, the city and the applicant, right, and the developer. If you identify, because it's a mutually agreed upon term, and the developer agrees and acquiesces to the fact that there are going to be ongoing costs, you can embed those terms in the development agreement so they become not one-time costs, but costs as they are deemed necessary.
Right, it would have to be in the framework of an assessment district or something like that gets incorporated or created at the time of development. So that's what we need to look into and see, is anybody doing it, and what would be the mechanism for us to move forward. I'm thinking in terms of an assessment district where there's ongoing contributions by the property owners who eventually buy into this development.
Yes, really brief. As you know, parking is a very challenging issue in the city, and so I have a few comments, but before I make those comments, I just wanted to provide the committee the fact that we have 27 preferential parking districts in the city, and of course the parking management is to try to manage parking in residential neighborhoods that's being intruded on from high-density housing and other development. The parking permit district was established by way of the vehicle code and also the Santa Ana Municipal Code. And again, it tries to, it allows residents to park on their streets by reducing intrusion. That's the primary purpose. And each district has to demonstrate a need, and the engineering division goes out and observes whether there's a need or not, and then once the need is established, then they have to go through a petition process. Once the petition process is completed, then on a block-by-block basis, we're able to provide parking permits. And then, of course, we put up the necessary signage and any striping and markings. This is a map showing that the 27 different districts, and as you can see, almost most of the city is covered by way of the parking permit districts. And so when we've heard about these challenges, instead of dealing with this issue all at one time through a major citywide study, which could take a really long time to complete in relative terms, what we did is we looked at two of the most challenging districts. We have one district which is bounded by Lincoln and the 17th Street, and it's near the northeast city limits. We chose this district because it seems to be very, very challenging. And there was another district that we chose, and that is bounded by Main Street, the railroad tracks, Edinger, and First Street. And again, they were chosen for similar reasons. And what we wanted to do to these districts is by staff, figure out what kind of housing types we have, basically conduct an audit on how many parking spaces are available on site on private property. So for example, if you have a single family resident with a garage, we would count the garage as an available parking space, and then we would also count the driveway as an available parking space if it can accommodate a car. So we would get all of the counts of available parking spaces on private property, and then we'd of course similarly provide how many on-street parking spaces we have, including all of the red curbing for site visibility and any other obstructions. We think that the audit is very, very important because there's some opportunities where we can adjust and provide for more parking around, say, a park. We have limited parking sometimes around parks because of the safety aspect. The police department would like to have no parking around parks because they can drive by and they can see late at night whether there's any activity in the park. So this is an opportunity where we might make adjustments. We might make parking available around parks if that's what the recommendations of this audit recommend. And then we can try those make those adjustments, and then we can work with police and report back on any safety activities. But at the same time, we want to be able to, in parallel, put out an RFP to perform a citywide study. So we would do both. We're hoping that with the in-house pilot study, that we could complete that in 90 days, and that actually provide some improvements in July this summer. At the same time, we would put out an RFP in June using some of the preliminary information that we're finding, and perform a citywide major study. And then, of course, we would bring those results back to the council. But we're really curious to see what the audit is revealing and what kind of immediate improvements we can put into in effect. And then, of course, use those results also for the citywide long-term study. So that's where we're at. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Great, thank you. I really glad that we're moving forward on this. I requested for us to do this pilot. I know Councilman Solorio and Councilman Villegas want to do a comprehensive audit, and I think our mayor mentioned it the last time that obviously that comprehensive plan can take from a year to 2+ years to actually do, specifically with 29 districts or 27 districts that we have. The only thing that I would just ask for us is to be a little bit nimble, because when we look at our on-street parking, we're very restrictive. And we know some of the issues that we face, that we're challenged with, and we kind of create our own problems. And in particular with our arterials, we're very restrictive with on-street parking. I definitely understand the safety, but there comes a point in time where we don't have a lot of traffic, like after 8 p.m., where we can actually allow for folks to park on-street parking, like in major arterials like Main, like Edinger, like First, where you see that overcrowding. People are fighting amongst each other within neighborhoods. But we have been, as I looked at the municipal code, I looked at when we started doing district parking, it's very antiquated, it's fairly old, and it's time that we resurface and relook, but more importantly that we try to be a little bit nimble, because our current on-street parking restrictions really have created a lot of problems for us. And I definitely understand that it's for safety purposes, but again, based on the issues that we're faced right now, challenged within the neighborhoods, I think the last thing that we want is to continue to see residents literally fighting with one another, putting trash cans, sitting out there on a daily basis for 3 to 4 hours to save a parking space for their children, to save a parking space for their husband when they come back to work. That's not right. Obviously, we had an incident, and I see this a lot when I go through the east side. People are putting trash cans, right, and are doing that. People get frustrated, and so again, and specifically in those areas, as we look at this pilot, if we can look at our arterials where we have very restrictive on-street parking, how can we uplift those during night hours and having to, maybe 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. when the travel gets heavy, starting at 7:30, 8 o'clock in those major arterials. And that would be something that I would just ask for you all to consider.
We will. And one thing I failed to mention is we heard that we had a one-size-fits-all policy.
Yes.
And so one of the things that we want to consider is having different thresholds that would trigger the parking. So in other words, we do an observation for the need, but we have one threshold for the entire city.
Yep.
And we might be able to maybe make adjustments to those thresholds so that maybe it would trigger actually providing parking without having to be a one-size-fits-all. So, yes.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Councilman Sarmiento?
This is a really important, I think, study to be done, because and what's odd is that I can totally see how the East Side neighborhood or the East Side district is a very intensely, it's just filled with problems, with parking. I don't see the other one as much. Maybe it's just not obvious to me, because I've always seen most of the problems happen in districts where you have a blend of single family and multifamily. You always get more saturation from the multifamily into the neighborhoods, just because there's overcrowding. You have issues where 2 and 3 families to a unit, and the impact of parking that it has on those. So I just one rings more true to me than the other, but there's probably unique problems to both of those, and those are both very differently demographically, right? Socioeconomically, they're different districts as well. I would just say when you're looking at the study, take a look at some of this sort of from the 100-foot level where you're being creative as well, because this isn't the first community that's dealt with parking problems. You look at Manhattan, you look at Boston, you look at cities that just have an intense lack of parking. And so what they've done is they've looked at relationships and partnerships like we've done for our parks and open space with our school districts, right? Can we use that space that those schools have for parking while the school's not in use, right? Can we use some multi-level structure that the private sector has available when those aren't being used? Can some reciprocal arrangement be struck? So there are other manners in which we can, kind of approach this. Another one is, look, now there's technology like stacked parking. Is there something that can incentivize or motivate, a residence or a property or a development that may have the capacity to be able to do something like that to absorb additional spaces as a function of this? So I just think, we have to be really creative. I think the best thing to do is disincentivize owning a car or having fewer cars to a unit space, but to monitor and police that is almost impossible, right? So to the extent that, there are ways to motivate people away from having a vehicle, that would be great. Maybe it's, creating, a line, a bus line or something that would incentivize people away from their vehicle. I just don't see it happening. So what we have to do is create more spaces because, doing these district parking permits just doesn't seem to be having the result that we need, right? It just pushes people out into other neighborhoods. So, if you could just, take a look at some of those sort of non-conventional, non-traditional ways as well.
Thank you, Councilman Sarmiento. Thank you, William. Now we're going to go on to the earthquake, and then I'm going to leave the in for Nabil on his two water issues, because Nabil's always fast.
Madam Pro Tem, I wanted to just open this up before our city engineer and acting public works director gets on it. When I first learned about the fact that our city hall, might have some kind of vulnerability, I immediately worked with our former director, in fact, Fred Muvasapur, and now it's fallen on William Galvez. Staff's looked at a pretty good way to assess this using a procedure that's in the American Society for Civil Engineers standard seismic safety protocol for analyzing buildings, and they have different levels, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. What I'm supporting is Tier 1, and they're going to go a little bit into what we're going to be looking at, which is the idea is to try to figure out how vulnerable are we, order of magnitude in terms of retrofit, and this is important because I've already met with representatives from Senator Feinstein's office, asking them to start to look to see if there are any FEMA hazard mitigation grants. That's what they were called before.
Yeah, we just missed that cycle.
And also to try to find a way to, make a special carve out for maybe projects that involve essential facilities like a city hall. And then the other thing that we're trying to see if we can leverage would be opportunities for creating an EOC. Right now, our EOC is really not a permanent one. It's over at the yard. To the extent that we can make the case that we would have the EOC in the City Hall, it might open up other funding avenues. So we're trying to be creative, but we need to study to give us the order of magnitude first and foremost. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Acting Public Works Director.
If he's not up, go ahead, Nabil, go ahead with your two items. If it's not up, is it up? Or do you guys both need or can you do it without it?
I can do the seismic without it.
Number 5, there it is. 5. There it is.
Oh, Lord.
I'm not a structural engineer. I know a little bit about it, though. So our city manager challenged us with putting an RFP together so that we can evaluate City Hall. And to to my surprise, the American Society of Civil Engineers has a prescribed method for evaluating structures, building structures. It's called ASCE 41-17. And it goes through what the city manager was describing as a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 analysis. And so the first thing to do would be to look at the tier 1 analysis, which is basically what type of structure City Hall is. They would research, that tier 1 analysis researches the building plans, the seismic codes at the time, the new seismic codes, and it, instead of doing an extensive evaluation, it just looks at the record data to build an assessment as to what might be needed, what type of detailed analysis might be needed. Before engaging that's tier 2 or tier 3, which is a lot more costly. A tier 1 kind of gives you an order of magnitude, you might say, as to what the city hall looks like. A tier 2 analysis would be taking the information from tier 1, and it would be more refined, more costly, and then it would come back with actual recommendations for improving the city hall. The tier 3 takes that even further, where it takes those recommendations and it actually designs what the improvements might be like. And of course, at that point in time, you'd have a really, really good idea of what the cost estimate would be. So all of that I just described is written in an ASCE 41-17 publication, and that's what we're ready to wrap into an RFP, and we're ready to publish it next week, if that's what the committee would authorize us. If we issue the RFP next week, we would evaluate and bring back a recommendation to the City Council sometime in June of this year. But that's what it would be. It would be a Tier 1 analysis, and then based on the Tier 1 analysis, we can then look at proceeding to a Tier 2 and/or a Tier 3.
Great. Any comments, Councilman Sarmiento? Any more comments?
The only thing that I want to comment is if the proposals come in within my signature authority, then I would just move to award and move forward and to report to council. And this is, if it exceeds the signature authority, then I would come to council for award.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you guys very much. Nabil?
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Martinez and Councilman Sarmiento. Tonight, I will provide you with a high-level update on the water rate pass-through charges. If you just indulge me a little bit, see if I can get this going. Where do I find that? Well, I can't get it done, so really quick. We need a mouse. Just as a background, the current water and sewer rate were adopted on March 6, 2015 for 5 years. The pass-through adjustment are applied to the commodity component of the water rate only. The pass-through is based on a set formula that was approved through the 218 process notification. This pass-through will require us to do a 30-day notification, and it is strictly to recover the cost of water and power that we pay to our member agencies and Southern California Edison to recover the cost. Water rates water rates have increased or proposed to be increased by both of our regional suppliers, Orange County Water District and MWD. Orange County Water District, as of today, they're proposing a 6% increase. Metropolitan has adopted a $1,050 rate on our Tier 1 water, a 3.4% increase, which we use 25% of our supply from Metropolitan. Edison has kept their rates unchanged at this point of time. The new water rates will be added, or the pass-through will be added to what was adopted initially through the rate study. Based on our calculations, we will add 24 cents per unit of water to the originally adopted rate of $2.83, which is a Tier 1 in Santa Ana, which will amount to $3.07 for the Tier 1 cost for our customers. This basically, towards the very end, the typical customer in Santa Ana will see about 4% increase in their monthly water bill of which is amount to $3.90 for a typical use of 15 units. The next step in the process is for us to send out the 30-day required 218 notice and then implement the new rate on July 1st of 2018 coming up. And I'll happy to answer any questions.
Any comments, Councilman Sarmiento?
So we saw this at the Orange County Water District last Wednesday when we had our general board meeting, and there was a letter that was signed by the three member cities, Santa Ana, Fullerton, and Anaheim, opposing this.
That's correct.
So they're on notice, and they understand that we're going to be pushing back on the RA being increased and having this adjustment made, and we're trying to explain that there are other ways we can try to, address this, and I think we spoke about maybe revisiting some of those capital improvements that they're looking at. But we see that the trend or the curve that they have anticipated doesn't benefit us.
That's correct. We would like to curb the increases as much as we can for our customers and the general public here. Really benefit from keeping the rates.
So my only question is, when do we address that over at OCWD? Is it in April that we vote on that, or is that
next board meeting will be where they're going to propose the new RA, and there will be a public hearing in April, and that where these rates will be set in concrete. They'll have to do a public hearing at two levels, the RA and the supplemental RA. So that's coming up.
Okay, just so we know, so we went on record as one of the three cities to oppose the increase.
Great, thank you, Councilman Sarmiento. Just one question, Nabil. Sure. I did see in our CAFR in our budget that we have about $8 million in the water fund reserve or something of that sort. Is that money going to be used for capital improvements, any of the sort? What are we going to be doing with those funds? Can someone answer that?
We do have projects lined up for the $8 million, if not more.
So it's already been it's already been allocated.
It's been earmarked for those projects. We need to go to a complete design on a lot of those projects and then into construction. In the same time, if you remember, the rate study has recommended that the water enterprise and the sewer enterprise keep a certain amount of reserve for our operations, and we have maintain that reserve, and so we're trying to keep it as we go forward and use the monies that come in for our projects, but continue with.
Do we have a policy of what that threshold should be, of what those reserves should be on that water fund?
Yes.
Actually, under the fiscal policy that's adopted, we address, we're trying to establish about 2 to 3 months operational reserve. In the case of the water fund, we also added a $1 million component for an emergency. So, for example, if a pipe bursts and they needed access to funding immediately, then we had set aside $1 million. So anything over the 3 months operational reserve and the $1 million is really can be identified for capital.
And also, those capital projects, are they in our going to be in our next 5-year CIP?
All of them are in the CIP. They are in the CIP
currently now, but yes. I guess those monies that we currently have unused, which projects will be which the money that's being earmarked for which projects are those that are coming up in the pipeline in regards to the 5-year CIP program? I guess it's the question I'm asking. They're all lined up. Yeah. They all have various sources of funding, but I guess it never tells us.
But for water, it is only one source of fund. As to date, it's just the water and the sewer enterprise. We don't have other sources right now. We're trying to apply for grants and such, but for now, it's all water money from the enterprise. And if you look at the Gantt chart that we provide you with on a monthly basis, those projects are in there with the amounts.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. And that concludes my
okay,
presentation.
fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, this meeting, any comments from? Great. I just have one in regards to wanting to make sure, and hopefully our city manager informed our acting Public Works Director, William, in regards to the letter of prejudice in regards to our active transportation projects. So I was in Sacramento last week and I met with the Secretary of Transportation and just wanting to make sure that there was a trailer bill. As you remember that walkthrough, I was going to see if we can put some language in there where money can be upfronted. So SCAG lobbyists last year did put a trailer bill into Bloom's, and we now can do a letter of prejudice and apply so that we could have those upfront costs for not just active transportation costs, but even through SB1 funds as well. If we do have projects and we need that, all we need to do is do an application and do a letter of prejudice, and we'll be able to move forward with our projects faster versus later, because I know we recently just told members of the community that one of the projects would be till 2020, but if we can please move forward with that, be greatly appreciated. If we need any help from SCAG staff, just inform me and I can get you the information. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.